A young boy, a pair of old, tattered boxing gloves, and a dream that no one believed in. He trained alone on a cracked sidewalk, punching the air with everything he had. No coach, no gym, no expensive gear, just pure determination. Then, one day, a stranger stopped to watch. A man in a hoodie, standing in the shadows, arms crossed. And when the boy finally turned around, his heart nearly stopped. Because standing right in front of him, watching every move, was none other than Sylvester Stallone himself. What happened next would change the boy's life forever. This is not just a story about luck. This is a story about grit, second chances, and the power of believing in yourself, even when no one else does. Before we dive into this incredible journey, hit subscribe to Storygram, because tomorrow we have another inspiring true story that you won't want to miss. Now let's begin. The city hummed with its usual rhythm. Cars honking. People are rushing. The scent of fresh coffee mixed with the distant smell of hot dogs from a cart down the block. It was the kind of place where people passed each other without a second glance, where everyone had their own worries and ambitions, and where dreams often got crushed under the weight of reality. But in one quiet corner, just beyond the busy streets, was a small empty lot. Cracked pavement, faded graffiti on the brick wall, a place nobody paid attention to, except for one boy. He was young, maybe 13 or 14. His clothes were worn a size too big for him, as if they had belonged to an older brother or maybe picked out of a donation bin. His shoes had seen better days, the soles peeling slightly at the edges. And on his hands, torn old boxing gloves. The kind that looked like they had been used for years, passed down from someone who had once believed in a dream of their own. Every afternoon, when school let out, he came here. He didn't have a coach. He didn't have a gym membership. He had no heavy bag, no ring, and no fancy equipment. Just an invisible opponent and a stubborn determination that wouldn't let him quit. Jab, jab, hook, slip, move. The boy danced on the pavement, sweat dripping from his forehead as he threw punches into the air. He wasn't playing around. He was serious, focused. He had studied fights on old phone screen, memorized footwork, and practiced every combination he could find. And now, this small, forgotten corner of the city was his arena. He didn't know that today, something was different. Across the street, standing near a black SUV with tinted windows, a man watched. Hood up, hands in his pockets. He wasn't just passing by. He had been there for a while. He had seen kids throw punches before, seen young ones full of energy, messing around with friends, pretending to be fighters. But this was different. This boy wasn't pretending. He was fighting. Even though there was no opponent in front of him, every move had purpose, and every swing had weight. The man watched in silence. A couple of teenagers walked by and snickered as they passed the lot. One of them pointed. "Yo, look at this kid. Thinks he's Rocky or something." The other laughed. "Yeah, bro, keep dreaming. You aren't making it out of here." The boy ignored them. He had learned to block out the noise. He had heard worse. The hooded man clenched his jaw. He had heard those same words before. The boy kept moving, slipping punches, ducking, countering. His rhythm was off, but his heart was there. The man across the street exhaled, then finally stepped forward. His boots hit the pavement with steady confidence. He walked with the kind of presence that made people glance twice. As he got closer, the boy threw a sharp left hook, twisting his body just enough to balance his weight. It was a solid shot, but the way his foot moved, it wasn't right. Not for real fighting. The man stopped a few feet away. "You drop your back foot too much when you throw your hook." The boy turned sharply. He hadn't noticed anyone standing there. Now, he was staring at a man in his late 70s. Rugged features, strong jaw, the kind of face that had seen battles inside and outside of the ring. There was something familiar about him, but the boy couldn't place it. He wiped sweat from his brow, looking at the man suspiciously. "What?" The man took another step forward, nodding toward the boy's feet. "Your balance. You're giving up too much when you swing. It's a good hook, but you'll get countered if you don't fix that." The boy squinted, sizing him up. "And what do you know about boxing?" The man smiled slightly, pulling his hood down. That's when it hit him. The jawline, the eyes, the presence. The boy's breath caught in his throat. You're... Sylvester Stallone nodded, but he didn't let him finish the sentence. Show me that hook again. The boy hesitated, his mind racing. Was this real? Was he really standing in front of Sylvester Stallone? The man who had played Rocky Balboa? The man whose movies he had watched 100 times, studying every fight scene, dreaming of one day stepping into a real ring? The boy's hands felt shaky, but he quickly steadied himself. He reset his stance, breathed in deep, and threw the left hook again. Stallone watched carefully. This time, he noticed something else. The boy's power was there, but his follow-through was weak. The actor, no, the fighter, tilted his head. Have you ever hit a real bag before? The boy shook his head. I don't have one. Stallone took a slow breath. He had seen talent before. He had seen kids with potential. But this was something else. And right then, he made a decision. He was going to change this kid's life. The boy felt his pulse pounding in his ears. He had spent years watching Rocky, dreaming about what it would be like to step into a ring, to hear the crowd roar, to prove himself. And now, the man who had inspired him, Sylvester Stallone himself, was standing right in front of him, watching his every move. This was a dream. Stallone crossed his arms, his sharp eyes locked onto the kid's stance. You've never trained in a real gym? The boy swallowed hard, shaking his head. No, just here. Stallone glanced around. Cracked pavement, rusty metal fence. No bags, no weights, no ring, just an empty lot. The kid had been training here, in the middle of the city, with nothing but his own will. Why boxing? Stallone asked. The boy hesitated. It was a question he had been asked before, mostly by people who thought he was wasting his time. But coming from him, it felt different. He shrugged. Because I don't have much else. Stallone nodded, as if he already knew the answer. He had heard it before. Hell, he had lived it before. Who's your favorite fighter? Stallone asked. Ollie. The boy answered immediately. And Rocky. Stallone smirked. You know Rocky's not real, right? The boy finally cracked a small grin. Yeah, but he feels real. Stallone liked this kid already. He wasn't trying to impress him, wasn't acting starstruck. He was just real, hungry. And there was something in his eyes, a fire that reminded Stallone of himself when he was younger. All right, Stallone said. Throw me a 1-2. The boy hesitated. What? Stallone raised his hands like mitts. Jab cross. Let's see it. The kid squared up. He wasn't going to waste this chance. He snapped out a jab. Quick, sharp, then a right cross. It was fast, but not quite right. His weight wasn't fully behind it. Stallone didn't say anything at first. He just nodded, thinking. Then, finally, you're fast. That's good. But you're throwing with your arms, not your legs. Power comes from the ground, kid. From the feet up. You ever hear about kinetic linking? The boy shook his head. Stallone shifted his stance, planting his feet firmly. He moved slowly, deliberately, like a coach breaking down technique. When you throw, it's not just your fist. It's your feet, your hips, your shoulders. Everything moves together. That's how you get real power. He motioned for the boy to try again. The kid nodded and reset. He took a deep breath, squared his stance, and threw the combo again. This time, Stallone noticed something. The kid listened. His right cross had more snap, more weight. It still wasn't perfect, but it was better. Stallone grinned. Not bad. The boy couldn't believe what was happening. Sylvester Stallone, the man who had embodied one of the greatest fighters in film history, was coaching him. Here did I end this empty lot. For a moment, he thought about asking for a picture, but something stopped him. This felt too real to ruin with a selfie. What do you train? Stallone asked. The boy hesitated again. He didn't want to admit the truth. I don't have a gym. Stallone raised an eyebrow. No coach? No. Stallone crossed his arms again, nodding. He could see the hesitation in the kid's face. He wasn't making excuses. He was embarrassed. Your parents? Stallone asked, his voice softer now. The boy looked down. Just my mom. Stallone didn't push. He didn't need to. He understood. There was a long silence. Just the hum of the city, the distant sound of traffic, and the rustling of a few leaves as a breeze blew through the lot. Then Stallone finally spoke. Have you ever been inside a real gym before? The boy shook his head. Stallone pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. I know a guy. Owns a gym not far from here. We're going to fix that. The boy's heart nearly stopped. What do you mean? Stallone looked him dead in the eye. I mean, you're coming with me. The boy stood frozen, trying to process what he had just heard. Was this really happening? Sylvester Stallone had just told him he was taking him to a gym. A real gym. Not this cracked pavement, not a makeshift training spot in a back alley. An actual boxing gym. The kid's hands trembled slightly, his mind racing. He had watched 1,000 training montages, imagined what it would be like to step into a ring, to hear the sound of a speed bag popping, to smell the sweat and leather in the air. But he never thought he'd actually be there. And now, Rocky Balboa himself was offering to take him. Stallone could see the hesitation in the kid's eyes. What's the matter? The boy swallowed hard. I don't know if they'll let me in. Stallone chuckled. Kid, I don't think that's going to be a problem. He motioned toward the black SUV parked across the street. Come on. The boy hesitated again. Something in his gut told him to stop, to turn around, to pretend none of this was happening. It wasn't fear, at least not the kind he was used to. It was doubt. For years, he had told himself that guys like him didn't get opportunities like this. He had convinced himself that he would always be the kid training alone, that stepping into a real gym with real fighters was just something he saw in movies. This didn't feel real. But then he looked up. Stallone was still standing there, waiting, arms crossed, that same look in his eye, the look of a man who had been told no 1,000 times but never let it stop him. The kid took a deep breath, and then, before he could talk himself out of it, he stepped forward. Stallone gave him a small nod. That's more like it. They crossed the street, and Stallone opened the SUV's passenger door. The kid climbed in, his heartbeat hammering. He had never sat in a car this nice before. The leather seats, the faint scent of cologne, and something expensive he couldn't quite name. It felt like another world. Stallone got in the driver's seat and started the engine. The rumble filled the cabin, smooth and powerful. As they pulled onto the road, Stallone glanced over. So, what's your name? The kid blinked, caught off guard. Jason. Stallone nodded. Jason. Good name. Jason still didn't know what to say. Was he supposed to act normal? Crack a joke? Ask him about Hollywood. So he just stared out the window, watching the city blur past, his stomach twisted in knots. 5 minutes ago, he was throwing punches at the air in an empty lot. Now he was riding through the city in a car with Sylvester Stallone. None of this made sense. After a few minutes of silence, Stallone finally spoke. You know, when I was your age, nobody thought I had a shot either. Jason turned to look at him. Stallone kept his eyes on the road, but his voice was steady, almost distant, like he was remembering something from long ago. I didn't come from money, didn't have connections. And let me tell you something, nobody was lining up to give me a chance. Jason swallowed. He had read about Stallone's early struggles, how he was broke, how he wrote Rocky with only a few bucks to his name, and how he refused to sell the script unless they let him star in it. But you know what kept me going? Stallone continued. It wasn't talent. It wasn't luck. He tapped his chest with 2 fingers. It was this. Heart. Jason stayed silent, hanging onto every word. Anybody can throw a punch, Stallone said. But what separates a fighter from a champion is what happens when you get hit. Jason nodded slowly. He understood. The gym was coming into view now. It wasn't flashy. No neon signs, no high-end branding, just a red brick building with an old wooden door and a simple sign above it that read Mendez Boxing Club. Jason felt his throat tighten. This was it. Stallone pulled into a small parking lot on the side and killed the engine. He turned to Jason. Are you ready? Jason's palms were sweaty. His stomach twisted in knots. But he wasn't about to back down now. He nodded. Yeah. Stallone smirked. Then let's go. They stepped out of the SUV, and Jason followed Stallone toward the door. The moment they stepped inside, the smell hit him first: sweat, leather, liniment oil. The unmistakable scent of a real boxing gym. The sound came next. The rhythmic pop-pop-pop of a speed bag. The heavy thump of a body shot landing against a punching bag. The distant shouts of a coach barking instructions. Jason's heart pounded. He was here. Inside the ring, a fighter was going through drills with a trainer, his body moving like a well-oiled machine. A few other guys shadowboxed in the corners, sweat dripping down their backs. And then, from the far side of the gym, a voice called out, "Holy S asterisk asterisk asterisk. Is that Sylvester Stallone?" Heads turned. Conversation stopped. Within seconds, the entire gym was staring at them. Jason shrank slightly, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on him. A man in his 60s, built like a tank, stepped forward from the back office. He had a salt and pepper beard, thick arms, and a no-nonsense look about him. He wiped his hands on a rag and narrowed his eyes. "Stallone, what the hell are you doing here?" Stallone grinned. "Good to see you too, Mendez." Mendez shook his head, still in shock. "Last time I saw you, you were in a damn tuxedo at a movie premiere. And now you're just walking into my gym?" Stallone shrugged. "Needed a favor." Mendez raised an eyebrow. "A favor?" Stallone motioned toward Jason. "This kid needs a gym." Jason's stomach clenched. He suddenly felt very small. Mendez crossed his arms, giving Jason a slow once-over. "And who the hell is he?" Jason opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say a word, Stallone answered for him. "He's a fighter." Jason felt his throat go dry. A fighter? That's what Stallone had just called him. Not a kid. Not some beginner. Not just a kid who throws punches in an empty lot. A fighter. Mendez narrowed his eyes, looking Jason up and down. His arms were crossed, his stance firm. This was a man who had seen thousands of guys walk into his gym over the years. Some had talent. Some had potential. Most had excuses. "Yeah?" Mendez said finally. "You got any fights under your belt, kid?" Jason shook his head. "No, sir." Mendez smirked. "Didn't think so." Jason felt his stomach twist. He wanted to say something, to explain that he wanted to fight, that he had trained every day, that he had studied techniques on his phone for hours every night. But he knew how this worked. Words didn't mean a damn thing in a place like this. Mendez turned back to Stallone. "You bring me a kid with no experience, no record, and you expect me to hand him a pair of gloves and throw him in the ring?" Stallone smiled. "Not that I expect you to do what you do best." Mendez sighed, rubbing his temple. "Damn it, Sly. Are you still pulling this movie star magic trick on people?" Stallone chuckled. "Not magic, old friend. Just instinct." Mendez exhaled, then looked back at Jason. "All right, kid. You want to train here?" Jason nodded, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Mendez stared at him for another long moment, then pointed to the far end of the gym. "See that heavy bag?" Jason nodded. "Go hit it." Jason blinked. "Now?" Mendez snorted. "No, next week." "Of course now." Jason didn't hesitate. He dropped his backpack, tightened the straps on his worn-out gloves, and walked over to the bag. He planted his feet, bounced lightly on his toes, took a deep breath. Then, boom, his right hand snapped into the bag with a sharp, solid impact. The leather shuddered under his fist. A few of the other fighters glanced over. Jason threw another punch, then another. He focused, making sure his feet moved right, his shoulders turned, and his body followed through. He could feel Mendez watching, judging, and Jason knew he wasn't looking at power. He was looking for something else. Mendez turned to Stallone. "He's stiff." Stallone nodded. "A little." "His footwork sloppy." Stallone grinned. "A little." Mendez rubbed his chin. "But he's got a damn good right hand." Jason's heart skipped. He didn't react, didn't stop punching, but those words burned into his brain. Mendez walked over and stood next to Jason. He watched in silence for a moment, then placed a firm hand on Jason's shoulder. "Okay, kid, that's enough." Jason stopped immediately, breathing hard, sweat trickling down his forehead. Mendez crossed his arms again. "Have you ever had a real coach before?" Jason shook his head. Mendez exhaled. "Jesus, Sly, you really know how to pick him?" Stallone just smiled. Mendez studied Jason for another few seconds, then finally nodded to himself. "All right, you're in." Jason's eyes widened. "I am." Mendez smirked. "Yeah, you got something. A spark. You ain't got technique. You sure as hell don't have experience." but that we can fix. Jason's chest swelled. For the first time in his life, someone believed in him. Mendez motioned toward side door. Locker room's in there. Get changed. Training starts in 15 minutes. Jason hesitated. Mendez narrowed his eyes. Something wrong? Jason looked down at his clothes. His oversized shirt. His cheap shoes. The only shorts he had were the ones he was already wearing. He didn't have anything else. Mendez seemed to read his mind. He sighed, walked over to a shelf, and grabbed a pair of gym shorts. Here, they're a little big, but they'll do. Jason took them carefully, as if they were made of gold. He nodded. Thank you. Mendez waved him off. Don't thank me yet. You haven't made it through a workout. Jason rushed toward the locker room, his heart pounding with excitement. As soon as he disappeared through the door, Mendez turned back to Stallone. All right, Sly, tell me the truth. Why'd you bring him here? Stallone exhaled. Because he reminds me of me. Mendez was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. Yeah, I thought so. Stallone glanced toward the locker room. You're going to push him, right? Mendez snorted. I'm not going to hold his hand if that's what you're asking. Stallone smirked. Good. Then he turned to leave. Mendez frowned. You're not staying? Stallone shook his head. Not he needs to do this on his own. Mendez chuckled. Still got that tough love attitude, huh? Stallone grinned. Worked for me. With that, he pulled up his hood, gave Mendez a quick nod, and walked toward the exit. But just before he stepped out, he paused. He glanced back one last time, just as Jason came out of the locker room. He had changed into the gym shorts. His hands were taped. His stance looked stronger. And for the first time, he looked like he belonged. Stallone smiled. Then he walked out the door, disappearing into the city. Jason had no idea his real fight was just beginning. Jason stood in the middle of the gym, fists clenched, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He was in, not watching fights on a cracked phone screen, not throwing punches at the air in an empty lot. He was here, inside a real gym, surrounded by real fighters. This was what he had dreamed about for years. But now, standing on the edge of the training floor, with Mendez watching him like a hawk and the other fighters glancing his way with curiosity or maybe doubt, Jason felt something else creep in. Pressure. He couldn't mess this up. He wouldn't mess this up. Mendez clapped his hands. All right, kid. First lesson. We start with footwork. Jason nodded. Okay. Mendez pointed to a faded red line painted on the gym floor. Stand there. Jason stepped onto the line. Mendez grabbed a long rope and dropped it at Jason's feet, stretching it out in a straight path across the gym. This is your life now, Mendez said. Your feet stay on this rope. You move forward, you move backward, but you never leave the line. Jason frowned. What about side to side? Mendez smirked. You think you're ready for angles already? First, you learn balance. Then you learn angles. Then, maybe if you don't pass out first, we talk about throwing real punches. Jason swallowed. The way Mendez said it made him realize this wasn't going to be a fun little movie montage. This was going to hurt. Mendez pointed to a fighter in the corner, an older guy, mid-20s, sharp-eyed, lean muscle. Luis, come here. Luis jogged over, cracking his knuckles. Yeah, coach? Mendez gestured to Jason. Show him. Luis grinned, stepping onto the line. He balanced perfectly, knees bent, shoulders loose. Then, without breaking form, he started gliding forward and backward, moving with the rope like it was second nature. Mendez looked at Jason. Your turn. Jason set his stance. He bent his knees, squared his shoulders, and tried to copy what Luis had just done. He took a step forward. His back foot dragged. Mendez sighed. Again. Jason reset. Another step. This time, he overcorrected, putting too much weight on his back leg. Mendez shook his head. Again. Jason clenched his teeth. He hated messing up, but he did it again, and again, and again. 10 minutes passed. His legs started burning. 15 minutes. His calves were on fire. 30 minutes. Sweat dripped down his face. Still, Mendez wasn't satisfied. Jason wanted to scream. He had spent years training himself. He knew how to throw a punch. He knew how to move. He wasn't some beginner. And yet, here he was stuck on a damn rope, walking like a kid learning to take his first steps. Luis smirked. Feeling it yet? Jason exhaled sharply. Yeah. Luis nodded. Good. That means you're doing it right. Jason wanted to argue. He wanted to tell them he could do more. But then he looked at the other fighters in the gym. They weren't laughing. They weren't mocking him. They were watching. And that's when it hit him. This wasn't a test of footwork. This was a test of patience. Mendez was seeing if Jason would quit. Jason straightened his back, locked his focus, and moved again. This time it was better. Still not perfect, but better. Mendez gave him a small nod. All right, that's enough for today. Jason almost collapsed in relief. He had survived. For now. As he grabbed his water bottle, gulping down cool relief, Mendez leaned in. You're slow. Jason wiped sweat from his brow. I'll get faster. You have no rhythm. I'll find it. Mendez studied him for a long moment, then smirked. Good answer. Jason felt a small flicker of pride. Mendez clapped his hands. All right, you're back here tomorrow. Same time. Jason nodded. I'll be here. Mendez turned, already walking away. And kid? Jason looked up. Mendez gave him a sharp glance. Bring running shoes. Jason groaned. Tomorrow was going to hurt even worse. Jason woke up the next morning sore as hell. His legs felt like concrete blocks. His calves ached. His back was tight. And yet, when he glanced at the old alarm clock next to his bed and saw that it was 6 a.m., he smiled. Because today he was going back. The gym. The fighters. The shot at something real. He pulled on his only pair of running shoes, the ones with the worn-out soles and the frayed laces, and headed out the door before the city had even woken up. The morning air was crisp, the sidewalks mostly empty. As he jogged toward Mendez Boxing Club, every step sent a fresh jolt of soreness through his legs. But he didn't slow down. He didn't care about the pain, because pain meant progress. By the time he reached the gym, Mendez was already outside, arms crossed, watching him with that same no-nonsense look. Damn, kid. Thought you wouldn't show. Jason panted, hands on his knees. Told you. I would. Mendez smirked. All right, let's get to work. Jason expected more footwork drills, more rope walking, more mental torture disguised as training. But today was different. Today, Mendez walked over to a shelf and grabbed a pair of real boxing gloves. He tossed them at Jason. Put him on. Jason's heart skipped. This was it. He slipped his hands into the gloves. They were heavier than he expected, snug against his knuckles, like armor being strapped on before battle. Mendez led him to a heavy bag. All right, Mendez said. You've been throwing punches at air your whole life. Now you're going to feel what it's like to hit something real. Jason nodded, setting his stance. Mendez watched him carefully. Start slow. Power doesn't mean S*** if you have no control. Jason took a deep breath. Then, boom. His right hand exploded into the bag. A solid hit. Not perfect, not clean, but strong. The bag swayed slightly. Mendez didn't react. Again. Jason threw another. And another. And another. Each time, he adjusted. Each time, he felt the weight of the punch. By the 10th shot, his knuckles ached. By the 20th, his shoulders burned. By the 50th, sweat dripped down his face. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. Because this was the first real training of his life. And he wanted more. After what felt like an eternity, Mendez finally held up a hand. That's enough. Jason stumbled back, gasping for air, his arms trembling. Mendez smirked. Not bad, kid. Jason wiped sweat from his brow. Yeah? Mendez nodded. Yeah. Jason felt a fire ignite in his chest. For the first time, he belonged here. For the first time, he wasn't just some kid throwing punches at shadows. He was a fighter. Mendez clapped a hand on his shoulder. Same time tomorrow. Jason nodded, swallowing his exhaustion. I'll be here. Mendez turned away, but then, just before walking off, he glanced back. Oh, and kid? Jason looked up. Mendez grinned. Welcome to the gym. And just like that, everything changed. Jason wasn't just a boy in an empty lot anymore. He had a place, a purpose, a path forward. And it all started because one man saw something in him. One man stopped, and believed in him when no one else did. That man was Sylvester Stallone, and that moment changed Jason's life forever. If this story inspired you, hit subscribe to Storygram, because tomorrow we have another story that'll change the way you see the world. See you in the next one.